controlled forward lowers the boom. Pulling the rotation lever swings the boom to the right. Pushing the lever swings it to the left. Keep in mind that the boom can swing all the way around, so be careful when the boom gets near the cab of the truck. It can easily decapitate roto beams or worse. So watch where the boom is moving. That's one of the keys to safe operation. Always look before you move the boom. When swinging the boom left, look left. When raising the boom, look up. Power lines are there, and they can kill if you aren't watching when raising or extending the boom. The truck, boom, and second stage extension are not insulated, nor is the operator. So keep the boom at least 10 feet away from electric lines. Besides looking, listen. You'll get accustomed to the normal sounds of the machine's operation. If you hear something wrong, it may mean just that. Something's wrong. Look, listen, and be alert. There's one more point you need to be aware of when operating the boom. It's rated capacity. That is, how much you can lift at different boom positions. As you can see from this chart, the higher the boom is raised, the more it can lift. But the more the boom is extended, the less it can lift. So keep that in mind when extending or lowering the boom with a heavy load. The boom has a built-in device that won't allow it to lift more than it's able to. So always try lifting the load a little with the boom first. If the boom can lift it, then it's safe to use the winch. And that's boom operation. Remember, we'll be looking at the winch, auger, and bucket operations in Part 2. Now, though, let's move on to the daily preventive maintenance checks. The daily checks on the truck are covered in another course, so here we'll concentrate on the winch, auger, and bucket. Hydraulic fluid is the lifeblood of the machine, so with the truck on level ground, the boom in its rest, and all the cylinders retracted, check the hydraulic fluid level. It should read between add and full. If it's low, add the right type of fluid. The wrong type will damage the system. You'll have to lower the boom to inspect the auger, winch, and bucket. So put the truck transmission in neutral and engage the PTO. While you're walking around to the controls, check the roto beams to make sure they're working. Remember to raise the boom a few feet before lowering the outriggers to stabilize the truck. Then, slowly lift and swing the boom. With the engine warmed up, the boom should move smoothly and easily. In cold weather, you may have to let the engine run for a while. If you notice any problems, shut down and report them immediately. When the boom has lowered enough, begin your inspection. The order of inspection isn't as important as the fact that everything is checked. Look at the auger storage cable. It has to be in good condition. Otherwise, if it breaks while stowing or unstowing, serious damage could occur to equipment or to your co-workers. Although there isn't here, there should be a clip that shuts tight on the hook. and the hook itself should be undamaged. Examine the load line. It must be in good condition. No worn or frayed edges. If it is damaged, get it replaced. You don't want a line to break, particularly if it's carrying a heavy load high off the ground. Look over the hoses and connections. They should be tight, without rips, tears, or leaks. Make sure the auger is securely bolted to the drive shaft and that it's latched at the side of the boom. Basically, you're looking for anything that could hinder safe operation. Remember, if there's a problem, it'll have to be fixed before you start any work. Next, check the bucket. It should be secured to the boom. Swing freely with the brake off and hold tight with the brake set. Check the brake assembly. All nuts and bolts must be tight. The bucket itself should be clean and undamaged. Now grab a handhold and carefully climb onto the truck bed and inspect the load line all along the boom. It should be straight and undamaged. Also check for any leaks, broken support pins, or other damage. Finally, examine the teeth of the auger for loose bolts and excessive wear. And that's it for the inspection. But one very important part of preventive maintenance is greasing. So look over the lubrication chart in the operator's manual to find the locations of the grease fittings and the recommended service intervals. Basically, anything that moves needs to be lubricated, and you'll have to do it every day if you're going to be working in dusty or rainy conditions. Okay, with the inspection and lubrication completed, you can return the boom to a few feet above its rest. Raise the outriggers and lower the boom into its rest. Finally, raise the winch line so that it's not hanging below the end of the boom. That's just common sense. You don't want it swinging freely when you travel. With the boom in its rest, the winch raised, and the PTO disengaged, the truck is ready to hit the road. But remember, your responsibility for preventive maintenance doesn't end here. Always be on the lookout for leaks and other problems while you are on the job. And that brings us to the end of this program on daily checks and preventive maintenance. In Part 2, we'll look at the operation of the winch, auger, and bucket. This is Part 2 of winch, auger, and bucket operation. You'll remember we covered the truck's major parts, boom operation, and daily preventive maintenance checks in Part 1. Here in Part 2, we'll look at the safe operation of the winch, auger, and bucket. And the best place to observe these operations is on the job. Let's start with the winch, which is being used on a guardrail installation. First, park the truck so that the boom will operate on a stable surface. Stay away from slopes But if they're unavoidable, put the truck where all the work will be done on the high side of the slope. Lower the outriggers on both sides before starting any work. The surface below the outriggers should be solid and firm enough to support the weight of the truck. If not, you'll have to find something solid you can put under the outriggers. Position the boom over the load. Don't try to pull sideways with the winch. This will cause wear and eventual damage. In this case, the winch is being used to pull out and move posts. Loosen the posts as much as possible before trying to pull them out. You can't be sure how tight a post is in the ground, and pulling too hard can damage the boom or tip you over. Posts don't weigh a lot, but remember, particularly when lifting a heavy load, to lift with the boom first to see if the load is within the boom's rated capacity. Then raise it with the winch. The controls to operate the winch are simple, up and down. But as you can see, there's a lot of thinking involved. For example, when swinging the boom, keep the load at a consistent height. Keep in mind that your ability to lift decreases as the boom is extended or lowered. If you're not careful, you could tip. Let out the winch line when raising or extending the boom. Letting out the line will keep the boom and boom tip from being damaged by the load, and it'll keep the load at a steady height. And of course, always pay attention to where the boom is going. Stay away from overhead utility lines. Remember, look, listen, and be aware. As you saw in Part 1, inspection of the equipment doesn't end with the daily checks. Check the winch line whenever you get a chance. Replace worn or frayed ropes immediately. Always wear a hard hat and wear gloves, especially when handling wire winch line. Be careful when unhooking a load from the winch. Cable twisting builds up and releases a lot of energy when the load is unhooked. And finally, the winch should never be used to lift personnel. And those are the main points you need to be aware of for safe and effective winch operation. As you can see, most of the safety items are just plain common sense. The same holds true for operating the auger. The auger is stowed alongside the boom. To unstow the auger, raise the boom high enough so that when the auger is lowered, it will clear the truck and any other obstacles. Next, fully retract the second boom stage. This way, the auger hanger bracket will automatically attach itself to the second stage. If it's not retracted all the way, the auger will be left behind when the second stage is extended. Set the digger in low gear and push the digger control forward. The auger will roll up off the latch and take up any slack on the cable. Then you can release the auger latch and pull back on the digger control. The auger will start to unwind off the cable. Look and be sure that everyone is standing clear of the auger at this point. These cables have been known to break or unlatch, swing down, and cause serious injury. Unwind the auger until the wind-up cable swings free. Then release the digger control. Okay, now you're just about ready to start digging. But before you begin, be absolutely sure about where it is you're digging. I've already mentioned overhead hazards. Also be aware of any utility lines that may be running underground. Before you start digging, make sure Blue Stake was notified and check the plans for any utility markings. When everything checks out, you can proceed. Pushing the digger control turns the auger clockwise and starts digging. Lower the boom as the auger digs down. Gravity alone won't lower the boom. And if it isn't lowered with the auger, the constant downward pull of the auger on the boom will damage both the boom and the auger. You'll also have to extend the boom slightly as the auger and boom go down to keep the auger in line with the hole. If not, the hole will be dug at an angle. So as you can see, digging a straight hole requires coordinating the digger, boom lower, and extension controls. Here in Utah, there are a wide variety of soil conditions. So you'll have to find the digger speed and amount of downward force you'll need to do the job. In most cases, you'll operate the digger at low speed. However, the soil may be hard enough that you'll have to use the higher speed. Remember though, extended use of the high speed will wear down the equipment. So keep an eye on the RPM and oil temperature gauges to make sure the engine isn't under too much stress. The boom lower and digger controls vary the amount of downward force. Too much downward force, however, will cause the auger to corkscrew into the ground, which yanks the boom down. Unfortunately, this happens sometimes, and if it does, you'll have to pull back on the digger control until the auger gets back to its normal position. Pulling back on the digger control turns the auger counterclockwise and lifts it out of the hole. On this machine, this operation is called cleaning, and that's basically what it's used for. When the auger is loaded with soil, pull back on the digger control to raise the auger. Raise the boom and move the auger away from the hole. You don't want the dirt to fall right back in the hole you just dug. Then you can clean off the auger blades. Augers eventually wear out and have to be replaced. Also, different sized holes call for different sized augers. So let's take a look at changing the auger. First, lower the auger enough so that the bolt at the top of the auger tube can be removed. After the bolt is removed, and while someone is holding the auger, slowly raise the boom. This lifts the drive shaft from inside the auger tube. Keep raising the boom until the drive shaft is completely removed. Remember, the auger is heavy, so always get help to safely lift and carry the auger. With someone holding the new auger tube, slowly lower the drive shaft into the auger tube. When it has reached the desired length and the bolt holes are aligned, replace and tighten the bolt. You may have noticed I said desired length. That's because there are several hole positions in the auger tube, used to vary the length of the auger for different hole depths. Always remember to return the auger to the uppermost position on the drive shaft before stowing. Stowing the auger is basically the same as unstowing in reverse order. If it isn't already, put the digger in low gear and retract the second stage all the way. Then attach the loop on the end of the roll-up cable to the lug above the auger blades. With everyone standing clear, slowly push the digger control, just as if you were digging. The auger will start to wind up. Watch the cable to make sure that it's winding evenly and tightly around the auger tube below the cable guide. Operate the digging control until the auger tube engages the auger hanging bracket and pushes the latch aside. As soon as the latch snaps shut, stop operating the digger control. Always stow the auger before moving the truck further than 50 feet. If you need to move the truck a few feet to get to the next hole, put the boom in line with the truck. Make sure the path is clear and slowly move the truck. And those are the main points for the auger. Now let's take a look at the bucket on a sign installation job. The bucket, like the winch and auger, is a great tool that at first glance may seem pretty easy to operate. But remember, it's your skill and ability to always be alert that will make it a safe, smooth, easy operation. With that in mind, let's get onto the bucket. And the best way to get onto the bucket is to bring it to you. So lower the boom so that the bucket rests on level ground. Lock the brake and strap yourself in. Always keep the body belt on while you're in the bucket. There are no exceptions. There are two sets of controls for the bucket, one at the bucket itself and one at the main control panel. There is an upper-lower switch that allows the main controls to override the upper controls for emergencies. In most cases, if you're in the bucket, you should be operating the controls. You have the best view of where you're going, and that means you have to look where you're going. Remember, the bucket is not an insulated aerial device. Always, always be aware of power lines. Any contact at all will electrify the entire vehicle. Also, the bucket should be unlocked while you're moving. That way it's free to sway and stay vertical to the ground. When you reach where you want to work, set the brake and turn the function control lever off. That way, if you accidentally bump the controls, nothing will happen. And those are the main points concerning the bucket, which brings us to the end of this program on winch, auger, and bucket operation. If you have any questions at all about the equipment, how it works, and how to keep it working, read the operator's manual and ask your supervisor. Remember, the life of the equipment and those that work with it depend on your skill and ability to look, listen, and be aware. Anyone can drive a forklift, right? Well, sure, but there's a big difference between driving and operating. This is the first of two programs covering forklift operation. Here in Part 1, we'll look at operating techniques. Part 2 covers preventive maintenance. But before we get to all the details, let's take a quick look at how the forklift works. To begin with, of course, there are the forks. As you know, the forks can be raised and lowered, but they can also be tilted backward and forward. The forks can be spaced close together or far apart. Normally, the forks have to be close together when you're working with special attachments like this one for moving barrels. And the forks should be as far apart as possible when you're working with standard size pallets. The reason for that is obvious. You want as much support as possible at the sides to keep the load from falling off. All forklifts have these three features: raising and lowering, tilting, and fork spacing. But as you can imagine, just about every equipment manufacturer makes one. And sometimes it seems like we have all of them. The differences aren't really that great. As I said, all forklifts do the same thing. So it's just a matter of getting used to the controls. On this machine, you raise and lower the forks with the control on the left and tilt the forks with the control on the right. One important note about these controls: the farther you push them, the faster the movement. So until you get used to the lifting and tilting speeds, it's a good idea to move the controls slowly. On this forklift, you control both lifting and tilting with one lever. The diagrams and arrows show each of the movements. As far as gear shifting goes, forklifts have forward and reverse. On some machines, the shifter is on the floor. On others, it's on the column. The important point about shifting is this: always come to a complete stop before shifting. You're never in a big enough hurry to justify damaging the equipment. Many of our forklifts have one more control, the high-low range lever. And it's usually in the same place, to your right, on the floor. The low range gives the machine more power and less speed. And that's just what you want when you're working. So don't use the high range except for traveling around the yard. Okay, that's how forklifts work. Now, operation, beginning with startup. Now, even though we have several types of forklifts, you can follow this procedure for startup on all of them. First, make sure the parking brake is set and all controls are in neutral. Then just turn the key and start it up. If the engine doesn't start within 30 seconds, it's best to stop for a few seconds and then try again. Even though you can start the engine by cranking it continuously, you're just putting more strain on the starter and the battery than you have to. So wait and try again. In cold weather, you'll probably have to use the choke. But make sure to push the choke in as soon as the engine starts running smoothly. If you leave it out too long, you'll flood the engine. There's one more very important point about starting. You have to let the engine idle for a few minutes so the hydraulic oil pressure can build up in the system. Without the oil pressure, the forklift's no stronger than you are. And if you try to pick up a heavy load, it'll come right back down. So always let the engine warm up for a few minutes and operate the controls for lifting and tilting before doing any work. In fact, it's a good idea to run the forks all the way to the top and back down again. That way you get a good coating of oil along the full length of the cylinder. Just make sure there's enough overhead clearance. Lifting heights will vary among the different models, but as you can see, it's way up there. And that's startup. All controls in neutral, emergency brake set. Don't crank the starter for more than 30 seconds. Let the engine warm up for a few minutes and operate the hydraulic controls before working. Now let's look at operation. When you're sure the forklift is ready for work, raise the forks about 6 inches off the ground and drive ahead. In fact, whether you're carrying anything or not, you should keep the forks close to the ground. When the forks are raised, you can't see as well, and it also makes the machine top-heavy. For the most part, forklifts are used to load and unload pallets and to move them from one place to another. And for a job that looks so simple, there sure are a lot of things to keep in mind. To begin with, you should take a quick look at any load before you move it. The load should be stable, safely arranged, and no heavier than the forklift's load capacity. You're just asking for trouble if you try to move something that's not secure or too heavy. When you approach the pallet, go slow and keep the forks parallel to the ground. That way the forks will go all the way back through the pallet. Next, raise the forks slightly and tilt the load back. And remember, always travel with the load close to the ground, no higher than 6 inches. To unload the pallet, just reverse the procedure. First, tilt the load forward until it's parallel to the ground. Then lower the forks and back out slowly. Keep in mind that it's the rear wheels that do the steering. The back end swings out every time you turn. In wide open spaces, it's no big deal, but be careful in close quarters. It swings out a lot more than you might think. And always look before you back up. It only takes a couple of seconds for someone to walk behind you. Now, as I said earlier, you should use the low gear for working and the high gear for traveling. But that doesn't mean go fast just because you're in an open space. A sudden stop on a forklift means at the very least losing the load. As you've seen, operating a forklift requires a great deal of attention on your part. And there's more. Always be aware of the overhead clearance and the side clearance you need. A lot of the loads can be bulky. In fact, some loads are so big you can't see over them, even when the forks are only 6 inches off the ground. If that's the case, drive backward. Don't put yourself in a dangerous situation. You should always back down ramps, too. Again, there's no sense in taking unnecessary risks. And that's pretty much it for working with pallets. But there's one more very important point I want to make. Whenever you load or unload a truck at a dock, make sure the truck's back wheels are blocked so the truck stays in place. If the truck starts moving while you're on the ramp, you could be seriously injured. Okay, now let's look at working with barrels. We have a couple of special attachments to use that work quite nicely for moving barrels. For this one, all you have to do is move the forks closer together and hook up the attachment. This attachment is even easier to use. All you have to do to hook it up is slip the attachment over one of the forks and hammer it tightly in place. But use this attachment only for moving barrels that have a lip at the top. and adjust the fork so the attachment catches onto the barrel just under the lip. After that, you can follow the same procedures as you'd follow for working with pallets. Keep the barrel about 6 inches off the ground, go slow, and stay alert. I really can't emphasize these points enough. One of the big dangers in working with a forklift is that you get into a rhythm. Operating the controls becomes automatic, and you begin to perform all the operations quickly, and that's dangerous. As you saw earlier, a person could walk behind you in the short time it takes to get a load. Always, always look before you back up. Looking has to become as much a part of your operation as moving a lever. Don't rely on your backup alarm. A lot of people tend to ignore them after hearing them for a few hours. And one more time, go slow. You'll be surprised at how many things and people can get in your way. Going slow is your only defense against damaging something or hurting someone. And you know whose fault it's going to be if anything happens. One final point. When you're not using the forklift, be sure to lower the forks all the way to the ground. It's just amazing how many people will hit them if they're left up in the air. And that's it for forklift operation. As you've seen, there's not much you can take for granted. So take the time to do your job safely, and remember the dangers involved when things start to feel automatic. Some people can climb on board a machine that they're unfamiliar with and drive away. And that sure proves that they can drive anything. But it says nothing about their ability as an operator. The first step in operating any piece of equipment is to become familiar with the machine. Reading through an operator's manual doesn't mean you don't know anything. In fact, the opposite is true. It means that you do know enough to find out the exact servicing the machine requires. In this program, we'll look at all the preventive maintenance you should perform on your forklift. Preventive maintenance begins before you even start the machine. It continues throughout the day. It continues after you've stopped for the day. And with forklifts, special maintenance, or PMA, is required every 8 hours. Now, we all know that your forklift's not going to blow up the first time you forget to check the water level in the battery. But we also know this. If you do all the maintenance that your forklift requires, it's going to be around a long time. Your first step each day is to look over the entire machine. Just a quick general look to see if there are any obvious problems. Look under the forklift for any signs of leaks. If you find any, investigate. A leak is a certain sign that something's wrong. Tire trouble is about the last thing you need, so make sure there is enough pressure and that all the lug nuts are tight. Look over the tread and sidewalls for uneven wear, cuts, or punctures. Anything that could cause problems later on. Okay, now the engine compartment. Make sure the water level in the battery covers the filler wells and that the terminals are corrosion-free. You should check the engine oil every day. And not just the level. You should look at the condition of the oil too. If it's discolored or smells of fuel, don't start the engine. Contaminated oil will ruin the engine in no time. Your next checkpoint is the air filter. All you have to do is take off the cover and remove the filter. Then tap the filter lightly on your hand to shake out dust. But if the filter is really dirty, get a new one. Look over the belts, the fan, hoses, and clamps. Spotting and correcting problems now can avoid hours of downtime. Next, check the hydraulic fluid. Keep the level between the full and add marks. And that's it for the engine compartment. Just a few more checks to make. On this forklift, the brake fluid reservoir is on top of the dashboard. If you can feel oil inside the reservoir, you have enough. Next, the transmission fluid. The reservoir is under the floorboard. Again, keep the level between the full and add marks on the dipstick. Okay, now coolant. A low coolant level can cause overheating, so make sure the coolant level stays above the radiator core, about an inch or so from the bottom of the filler neck. Look over all the lines and hoses. Check for any signs of leaks and make sure all the connections are tight. Okay, the next step is greasing. There are only a few points to get on a forklift, so you might as well get them all. Start with the rear wheels. There are 2 fittings on each one. Now these fittings can be a little hard to reach, so turn the wheels as far as you can to make them easier to get to. And always wipe the fittings clean before you attach the grease gun. That prevents forcing dirty grease back into the fitting. Next, grease all the steering pivot points. On this machine, there are 4 fittings, 2 on each side. Check the operator's manual for your machine to be sure you get all the fittings. Okay, now for the front end. It's a good idea to oil the chain daily. The chain moves almost continuously while you're working, and keeping it lubricated will make it last longer. And that's it for daily checks and PMA. Remember, you are supposed to do a PMA every 8 hours. But you're also responsible for PMB, too, after every 150 hours of operation. The only differences between PMA and PMB are the additional steps of changing the engine oil and replacing the oil filter. And there's one important point about changing the filter. Always coat the gasket of the new filter with grease before you install it. The grease creates a better seal when the filter's in place, and it makes the filter easier to remove the next time it's changed. Preventive maintenance doesn't end with the daily checks, the PMA, or the PMB. In fact, it continues throughout the day. You should look, listen, and feel for signs of trouble. If you think something's wrong, stop working and investigate. Finding and correcting problems as they occur saves money and downtime. When you shut down at the end of the day, take a few minutes to look over your machine. Anything you can take care of now will save you time in the morning. So check for leaks or any sign of damage. And that's all there is to preventive maintenance. As you can see, there is not much to it. But if you take the time to do all the maintenance that your forklift requires every day, it'll be around for a long, long time. Here's one way to control roadside vegetation. And here's another. Now, for easy maintenance and operation, it's tough to beat these little critters. Of course, they don't cut grass very evenly. And they tend to take a lot of breaks. Now, the tractors and mowers we use for highway work are a bit more complicated to use. But boy, can they cut grass. Acres of it, and at just the right height, too. But without good operators to run them, well, we may as well go back to this. Part 1 of this series on rotary mower operation will cover daily checks, inspecting and servicing the tractor and mower before you begin work. Part 2 will cover operation, from starting up in the morning to shutting down at the end of the day. And in the third program, we'll look at PMA. That's the scheduled maintenance the operator is responsible for every week. Now, before we begin, let me make one suggestion. Take a few minutes to read the operator's manual for the equipment you'll be using. We've got a lot of tractors and mowers, and operating instructions and maintenance requirements will vary from one model to the next. Okay, let's get started with daily checks. Start with a good overall look at the equipment. Look for leaks, damage, loose or broken parts. If you find something wrong, either fix it yourself or let your supervisor know about it. Check your tires every day. Make sure they're inflated properly and that the tread and sidewalls are in good shape. Look for loose or broken lug nuts. And check behind the tires to find leaks from defective wheel seals. Check the engine oil every day. Now, we all know that not having enough oil can ruin the engine, but extremely dirty or contaminated oil can be just as bad. So take a good look. Make sure you've got enough power steering fluid in the reservoir. Just remove the plug and look inside. The level should be near the top of the reservoir. Next, check the coolant level. It should cover the entire radiator core, about an inch from the bottom of the filler neck. If it's low, add clean coolant to the right level. Keep the front of the radiator grill clear. Don't let grass or other debris build up on the grill. That could lead to an overheated engine. Bad fan belts can cause overheating too. Check the belt for tightness and signs of wear. And check the engine hoses and wiring. Make sure everything is tight and in good shape. Tractors often work in extremely dusty conditions, and that makes air filters absolutely critical. Some tractors have an air filter restriction indicator. When it turns red at the bottom like this, the air filter should be cleaned or replaced. In most cases, you can clean the filter adequately by tapping it lightly on your hand to shake out dust. Of course, if it's really plugged up, get a new filter. Some tractors have an oil bath type air filter. To check it, just remove the bowl and check the bottom. If there's a lot of dirt settled at the bottom, clean out the bowl and put in fresh oil. Still other tractors have pre-cleaners. The pre-cleaner traps dust before it reaches the air filter. If you have a pre-cleaner on your tractor, clean it out occasionally throughout the day. Diesel engines use a lot of air, and it has to be clean. If you're satisfied that everything on the tractor is in good shape, you're ready to start lubrication. There'll be a lubrication chart in the operator's manual. Refer to it to find the location of the grease fittings and the recommended service intervals. Be sure to hit the fittings on both ends of the PTO drive shafts. These shafts rotate at high speeds to drive the mower blades. They have to be lubricated every day to prevent damage. Don't let a burned-out bearing ruin your day or your equipment. Now, some of these fittings are hard to get to. You may have to remove the PTO shields to get at them, so be sure to replace the shields when you're done. One more point about lubrication. Always wipe the fittings clean before you attach the grease gun. That prevents forcing dirty grease back into the fitting, where it will do more harm than good. Now, inspecting and changing blades. To inspect the mower blades, you'll have to raise the 3 mower sections. I'll show you how to raise the sections later on in Part 2. But always make sure the parking brake is set and the engine is off before you inspect the blades. Lock both of the wings in place with a pin so they can't fall down, and insert a clip through the pin so it can't jiggle loose. And always block the center section of the mower before you get under it. Take a look at the mower blades. Look for chips, cracks, or just a plain dull cutting edge. To change the blades, just remove the bolts that hold them in place and pull the blades off. Blades should always be replaced in pairs, since blades of different weights can unbalance the mower and damage it. Check the bolts. If they're worn, replace them with approved bolts for your mower. Put on the new blades and tighten the bolts. Be careful not to put the blades on backward. They're not reversible. Secure the bolts by inserting a hairpin clip through them. Be prepared to change blades at the mowing area. It doesn't take long for them to become chipped, bent, or dull, especially in areas where there's lots of rocks and roadside debris. After you change the blades, pull on the spindle to make sure it's tight. There shouldn't be any play at all. Then inspect and change the blades on the center section as needed. Again, make sure you block the section before you get under there, so it can't fall down on you. And here are a few things to keep in mind when you're under there. Poison ivy, snakes, and bees. Choose your parking area carefully. There are a few more checks to make yet, but they should be done after startup. We'll cover them in Part 2. But remember, the whole point of making these checks is to find and fix problems that could lead to breakdowns out on the road. After all, one thing worse than riding a tractor on a hot, dusty day is fixing a tractor on a hot, dusty day. Mowing the roadsides of Utah's highways is a job that requires two things: equipment that's in good shape and an operator who can do the job safely and well. In part one of this program on the Rotary mower, we went through a series of daily checks you should make before you take the tractor out on the job. Now in part two, we'll cover operation, using the tractor and mower controls. And we'll include some operating techniques to keep in mind when you're out maintaining your stretch of road. Let's begin with startup. To start the tractor, first make sure the transmission is in neutral and the parking brake is set. Then turn the key to start the engine. Check the gauges on the instrument panel. You should get an oil pressure reading right away. If the gauge reads low oil pressure, shut off the engine. Low oil pressure indicates a serious engine problem. Make sure the battery is charging, and of course, check your fuel. Check your lights. You'll often mow in isolated areas, and your lights may be the only traffic warning devices available. Okay, while the engine warms up, let's go over some of the tractor and mower controls. Most tractors have a hand throttle instead of an accelerated pedal. It keeps your feet free to operate the clutch and brakes. There are two brake pedals, one for each rear wheel. Lock them together for traveling at higher speeds. That will brake both rear wheels equally. And unlock them when you're mowing. When they are unlocked, you can brake each rear wheel independently for sharper turns. And if you have to mow in areas where there's a good chance of getting stuck, use the positive traction pedal here to get both rear wheels pulling together for better traction. The transmission on this tractor has 8 forward gears, 4 gears in low range, and 4 more in high. The long lever is the gear shift, and the short lever is the high-low range shift. For highway travel, use the gears in the high range for more speed. But for mowing, stick to the gears in the low range. That prevents lugging the engine. And besides, you want to go fairly slow when you're mowing anyway, for safety and to ensure a good, clean cut. To raise and lower the 3 mower sections, you use these 3 control levers. Pulling the levers back raises the sections, and pressing the levers forward lowers them. You'll have to raise the sections for changing blades, for mowing around obstacles, and for highway travel. And there is one more control for the mower, the PTO. To press the clutch and engage the PTO to start mowing. The PTO shaft spins and drives the mower blades. To stop the blades, depress the clutch and move the PTO lever back to neutral. Never go anywhere near the mower while the PTO is engaged. Always wait until the shaft stops spinning before you go back to the mower. Okay, I think it's about time to leave the yard and see how all of this works. Raise the wings and center section first. Then fasten both wings so they'll stay up. You've got some traveling to do. Always raise the three sections and secure the wings before you take the mower out on the road. Lock your brakes together for highway travel. And don't forget to fasten your seatbelt. When you get to the work area, lower the wings and center section. Engage the PTO. And shift into a gear in the low range. Which gear depends on the height of the grass and the nature of the terrain. Go slow in deep grass. Keep an eye out for holes, washouts, or other obstacles that could upset the tractor. Check behind the mower frequently. If the cut is uneven, slow down even more and use a lower gear until you get it right. Now, the mower will go right through most of the trash that clutters its path. But some things you'll have to move or go around. And remember, never go near the mower while the blades are spinning. There's always a chance of something flying out from under the mower deck. For the most part, you'll operate the mower with the three sections down. But you'll occasionally have to raise a wing to get around signs, delineators, and other stationary objects. Slopes probably present the greatest hazard for mower operators. As a general rule, you should not put the mower on any slope that exceeds 3:1. That means for every 3 feet out, there should not be a drop of more than 1 foot. But you can't break out a surveyor's level every time you mow a slope. It's often a judgment call. So here are a few general rules to follow when you have to mow on a slope. The first rule is simple. Go slow. That's the best way to stay in control of a dangerous situation. Second, keep the mower sections down. Raising a wing on a slope might shift your center of gravity enough to tip you over. And the third rule, stay in gear. Never coast downhill while you're mowing or during highway travel. Whenever you stop to take a break, take some time to look over the tractor and mower. Keep the grill clear so air can flow through to the radiator. And check the blades and spindles for damage. You'll be amazed at how much junk is out there, hidden in the deep grass, just waiting to cause you trouble. Okay, now let's take a look at shutdown. What to do at the end of the day. It's often a good idea to fuel up at quitting time. That'll save you time the next morning, and a full fuel tank helps prevent condensation from forming in the tank. Then park on level ground. Put the transmission in neutral and set the parking brake. Lower the 3 sections to the ground. Never shut off a hot diesel engine immediately after it's been working under a full load. That could damage it. Let the tractor idle a few minutes before you cut off the engine. Then take some time to remove buildups of grass from the tractor and mower deck. And And when the mower is really dirty, steam clean it. That's the best way to clean off oil, grease, and caked-on debris. One more point. If you have to leave the mower at the site, be sure to park well off the road. That way you won't interfere with traffic, and you'll have plenty of room to do tomorrow's daily checks. And that's it for Shutdown and Part 2. Let's face it, until someone figures out a way to keep grass from growing, mowing the roadsides of Utah's highways is going to be a fact of life. So make the most of it. Take care of the equipment and use it the way it was meant to be used. Do that, and your reputation as a safe, skilled operator will be sure to raise some heads. In the first program on rotary mower operation, we went through the daily checks you should make before you take the tractor and mowing attachment out on the job. The second program covered operation, using the tractor and mower controls to get the job done. That job, mowing miles and miles of right-of-way, puts a lot of wear and tear on the equipment. Wear and tear that must be guarded against by both daily and periodic maintenance. So in this program, we'll look at the regularly scheduled preventive maintenance that mower operators should perform. For the tractor, I'm talking about both the PMA and the PMB. For the mower, I'll recap the daily check and then cover the PMA. There is no PMB. When you get right down to it, PMA is really just an extension of the daily checks I covered in Part 1 of this course. In fact, every PMA should begin with a daily check. If you've been doing your daily checks regularly, the PMA shouldn't hold any surprises for you. Be sure to include the points listed in the department's Equipment Preventive Maintenance Manual. That way you'll cover all the important steps. And read the operator's manuals for your tractor and mowing attachment. They'll answer most of your questions regarding the maintenance requirements of the equipment. Okay, let's get started with the tractor. Remember, when you do a PMA, begin with a daily check, the points I covered in Part 1. Then on to the PMA itself, after every 40 hours of operation. Lubrication is part of the daily check, as well as part of the PMA. It's up to you to see that all grease points are lubricated when they need it and before the equipment is damaged. So lubricate the steering arms, suspension points, and steering cylinder pivots. Also, lubricate the drive shafts and joints and the control levers. Be sure to wipe each fitting clean before you attach the grease gun. If you don't, you'll force dirty grease back into the fitting. Apply enough grease. Grease is cheaper than repair costs. Now, tractors work in a lot of dust. That means the air filter is critical to keeping the tractor running properly. To service the filter, remove it and inspect it for damage. In most cases, you can clean the filter adequately by tapping it lightly on your hand to shake out dust. But if the air filter is damaged or too dirty to clean, replace it with a new one. Next, the fuel filter. Check it for any water or sediment that may have collected, and drain it as necessary. Two of the fluids that have to be checked are the transmission oil and the hydraulic oil. On this tractor, they're combined, and you check them in the reservoir beneath the operator's seat. Just pull the dipstick and check the level. Keep it up to the full mark. If it looks a little low, check it again when the engine is warm. The oil may expand up to the right level. And remember, don't overfill any fluid level. In most cases, too much is as bad as not enough. Now the battery. Look at the water level in each cell. It should reach the rings inside the filler wells. Check the cables and terminals too. Make sure they're tight and free of corrosion. Check the brakes. Adjust them as necessary for proper tension. Look at the coolant level in the radiator. Keep the level above the radiator core, or just about an inch from the bottom of the filler neck. Finally, belts. You should give the belts at least a quick check every day. But for the PMA, look a little closer. Are they loose? Any signs of wear? Any cracks? Take the time to check them carefully and tighten or replace them if necessary. Okay, that's it for PMA on the tractor. Do the daily check. Lubricate all points indicated in the operator's manual. Service the air filter and the fuel filter. Check the fluid levels, transmission oil and hydraulic oil, battery fluid, and radiator coolant. And check the brakes and the belts. Now a brief look at what's involved in PMB on the tractor. You should do a PMB every 100 hours of operation. Change the engine oil. Be sure to drain all the old oil from the crankcase. As with other diesel equipment, collect a sample of the old oil to send for testing. Put it in the proper type bottle, label it correctly, and send it to the lab. Replace the oil filter. Lubricate the gasket on the new filter before you install it. That creates a better seal, and it will make it easier to remove the filter the next time you change it. Then add the correct type of oil. Pull the dipstick and read the level to be sure you've added the right amount. PMB is also the time to change the fuel filter. Dirty fuel is one of the most common causes of diesel engine failure. Water or sediment in the fuel can lead to all kinds of problems that lead to breakdowns. After you replace the filter, be sure to prime it with fuel to get all the air out of the filter. Check the drive belt tension, too. And one more point. Just as you begin every PMA with a thorough daily check, you should start every PMB with a complete PMA procedure. That way you'll have a pretty good idea of any problems that you can take care of yourself, or any that you'll have to bring to the attention of your supervisor. Now for the mowing attachment. The mower really takes a beating throughout the mowing season. To get it through the summer, you've got to perform thorough daily checks as well as the PMA, especially since the PMA is called for only annually and involves cleaning the unit and preparing it for winter storage. So to recap the daily check procedure, first, a general walk-around inspection. Look for obvious damage, leaks, loose parts. Lubricate all fittings indicated in the operator's manual. Be sure to wipe off each fitting before you apply the grease gun. Apply the right amount of grease to lubricate each fitting properly. And wipe off any excess so that it won't collect dust and cuttings. Inspect the hydraulic hoses, rams, and connections. Frayed hoses like these are a real hazard considering the pressure in the hydraulic system. Check the oil level in each gearbox. And check any pulleys, cables, or belts too. Take a look at the trail wheels. Remove any wires, cords, or debris wrapped around the axles. Make sure the tires are in good condition. Also, be sure the wheels turn freely and that the bearings aren't loose. Inspect the business end of the mower, the blades, and the bolts that hold them in place. Cracks, breaks, or excessive wear means that it's time to replace the blades. Check the chain guards too. They should all be in place and should be connected to each other by a cable for safety. Remember to check your lights before heading out. And to use them while you travel and during mowing. Finally, when you finish mowing for the day, clean off the mower. For one thing, it's impossible to inspect and service the mower properly if it's covered with dirt and grass. For another, it looks real bad. And third, if you let material build up, it'll begin to decompose, and that can damage the equipment. So sweep it off, or give it a good bath, or both, and do it every day. Now that leads right into the PMA, because the mower PMA starts with a good bath, a thorough steam cleaning to get the unit really clean so it can be prepared for winter storage. Once the mower is spick and span, here are the steps for preparing it for storage through the winter. All exposed bright metal surfaces should be coated with grease. Cables and rams likewise should be coated with grease. Finally, the wheels should be packed or have grease fittings installed. And that's PMA on the mowing attachment. Cleaning and preparation for winter storage. With that, you've come to the end of this program on rotary mower preventive maintenance. The daily checks, the PMA, and the PMB all have the same purpose: to help you spot and correct equipment trouble before it requires major repairs. After all, our tractors and mowers work hard, usually under tough conditions. But it's really the operator who gets the job done through careful operation and thorough preventive maintenance.